Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're at. This is Michael Cross here with another exciting episode of Unlock the Door Radio, where we go by the motto that you should question authority. And that comes directly from one of our founding fathers here in the United States, Benjamin Franklin himself. And speaking of Benjamin Franklin, who was a really foremost scientist of his era, I'd like to deal with something tonight which is going to have a profound effect on humanity. As much as the harnessing electricity has had on humanity, what's coming up in the near future is big time, and it's going to change everything. It's a game changer for every aspect of life. So, tonight we have none other than Daniel Estulin, who is an author. He's written 12 books. He has a program on RT, and tonight he's going to be sharing some information on transhumanism. Now, again, thank you for coming on, Daniel.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. You know, I have a real strong interest in transhumanism. I'm really into science, but also social science. And, you know, it seems like very few people know anything about it. They think it's like a science fiction thing, like on movies like Elysium or something like that. But your books and research seems to indicate that it's way more than just a science fiction plot. Could you go ahead and just kind of inform our viewers where you're coming from?
Well, it's actually a lot more than science fiction. It's actually science reality. And first of all, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, and thank you so much for the invitation to be on your show. It's a pleasure for me to share this time with you. There's a lot of, obviously, speculation about how much of my new book, Trans Evolution, The Coming Age of Human Deconstruction, is fiction, how much is fact, and how much is kind of a mix of the two. I assure you, from all the research and all the footnotes in the book, there's over 600 footnotes in the book, that it has very little to do with science fiction and all to do with reality for the very, very near future. The basis and the emphasis of the book is that we're standing at the cusp of the greatest evolutionary change in the history of mankind. What's coming in the next few years, and when I say few, the definition is about 3 to 5 years max, is going to completely redefine the very definition of what a human being is on the planet Earth. In fact, I can tell you without any doubt at all that the generation of our children, the kids who are today at 15 or 20 years old, they're the one last 100% human generation of people on the planet Earth. Their children, my grandchildren, they're going to be anything but human. They'll be transhuman children. They'll be post-human. They'll be man-machines. They'll be cyborgs. They'll be beings who are not totally human as a result of synthetic biology. Our DNAs are being changed as we speak through genetically modified crop. And again, what is about to hit us, human beings, of humanity over the next few years, combined with all the, geopolitical changes in the world, which, needless to say, I explain in the book, are not some irrelevant facts which we shouldn't worry about, but very much form part of this continuum, which includes all of these elements such as transhumanism, trans-evolution, synthetic biology, space exploration, economy, destruction of the world economy. And as I said again, it's the first book out there that puts all of these elements on one plateau and gives us a roadmap of humanity, or for humanity, of our near future.
Well, a while back I ran across this report, and it was called the National Intelligence Council's predictions for 2030. And essentially, they predict, if you read this, it seems that, yes, they talk about population growth, they talk about changing geopolitical realities, but they also bring up that in 2030, exactly what you said, people are going to be, what we see as the internet today will be like thinking about when, people were kids in the 70s playing Pong on like a little Atari system.
All of these reports actually have a basis, and the basis for these reports that you mentioned is the report that I got, which is actually how I got interested in writing this book 10 years ago. So the kernel of what today is my new book, Trans Evolution, began back in 2005 at the Bilderberg conference in Rotterdam, Germany, when one of my sources gave me a partial, it wouldn't be a report at the time, it would be a draft of what later turned out to be a blueprint on the future strategic trends for the entire planet Earth. And the report, which came out in 2007, is called Strategic Trends Report 2007-2036, a secret source document on the future of humanity. Today you can actually download it for free off of the internet. It's a 91-page report. I very strongly suggest people download it and read it. It's astonishing at how well these people understand the future of humanity. And when I say these people, these aren't some mindless or faithless bureaucrats. These are some of the greatest evolutionary thinkers, futurists, scientists, social scientists, geostrategists in world history. Again, Strategic Trends Report 2007-2036. And some of the conclusions of that report are striking and startling. For example, between now and 2036, the world's population will explode to 10 billion people. In one generation, about 2/3 of the world's population will be living in areas of water stress. So we're talking about by 2036, if there are 10 billion people, about 7 billion people will be living in areas where there's going to be lack of water. So lack of food, water, medicine, proper hygiene, education, basic human necessities will spell collapse, according to the report. And without mincing words, these people state explicitly that a growing gap between majority and a small number of highly visible super rich is likely to pose an increasing threat to social order and stability. And the result of that will result in civil war, intracommunal violence, insurgency, pervasive criminality, and widespread disorder. And as a result of that, they're talking about the breakdown of the very political international system and the globalized economy, which will result in the breakdown of countries. And by the 2036, countries will be replaced in most parts of the world by mega cities. And this report defines mega cities by population base of anywhere from 20 to 30 billion people. And again, so what we're looking at the change, the generational change in the very definition and understanding of what humanity is and how the world itself is going to be run.
Okay, what it sounds like you're describing for, the listeners is essentially a Hunger Games scenario, kind of a dystopian future where there's going to be the haves who will be like in, maybe a more modified version of our gated cities concepts, and the have-nots, which will be increasingly competing with each other for what limited resources that are still out there available for them.
Well, actually, the Strategic Trends Report calls it calls the future world the world of Blade Runner. It's it's a very appropriate definition, because if you think back to the Blade Runner when it first came out in the early 1980s, and a screenplay written by a brilliant American screenwriter by the name of David Peebles. It's the same guy who actually wrote Accidental Tourist, just to give you an idea. It very much fits the bill of what that world and the future near world will look like. And when you combine the technological advancements in all of its manifestations, in all of its fields, as I explain painstakingly in my new book, you have to understand that these people who work on these futuristic reports and scenarios, they don't make mistakes ever. There's never any room for mistakes in what they do, because every element of power is controlled by the people who run the world from behind the scenes. And one of the reasons, again, it's something that to a lot of people is very difficult to understand, is because people think of politics as foreign and national, whereas in fact national foreign policies have very little to do with the world, the way the world is run, and have very little effect on the world's development. It's the global politics which affect everything that's around us. And these global politics are not run by Congress, by Barack Obama's, by Putin's or anybody else. It's run on a supranational level by these, call them globalists, elites, whatever you want to call them, from behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, there's something interesting, and that is that I was listening to a Nobel Prize dinner. They had a presentation where they had a lot of Nobel Prize winners from a few years back. And the question came up of what would the future entail in regards to longevity. And it wasn't a question of whether there would be super increased longevity in the future. And I'm not talking about people reaching 100 potentially, but we're talking like 200 and beyond. And you know, that was what the scenario was. The thing is that every time I bring up transhumanism with people, the first thing they bring up is, well, there'll be overpopulation. How will the elite deal with the idea that there could be a doubling of the lifespan?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that man's future is in space. I think it has to be obvious to anyone out there. In other words, you know, if we extrapolate what we are today, which is 7 billion people, to the next 50 years from now, and we go to 10, 12, 15, 20 billion people, you know, and it's not a question of space, because there's more than enough space, you know, for 50, 60 billion people on the planet Earth. You know, you can put them all together. I mean, the people we have right now, you can put them all in Texas, and you're still going to have room left over. Okay? The point is we're running out of natural resources, and we're running out of water. Okay? India, which is a very large country with over 1 billion people, they're out of water. So the fact is that, you know, we have such incredible water stress across the globe. You know, obviously it makes one wonder what's going to happen in the very near future. And the fact is that if we go 50 years, 100 years, how about 1,000 years? How about 10,000 years from now? I mean, we have to extrapolate and plan ahead. Planet Earth is only this big. I mean, you can't extend it. You can't make it bigger. You can only make it smaller as a result of more and more people and, you know, greater and greater stress on the natural resources. Which means that the elite, they understand very, very well. And this is, you know, some of the most intricate things of this book. That it's a very good question, by the way, Michael, that you asked. You know, it's the problem of population is not a problem, because the elite understand that sooner or later we're going to have to conquer the galaxies in space. What they're doing right now is they're saying, you know, that there's just too many people on the planet Earth. We need to, you know, somehow reduce the world's population. And needless to say, you know, reduction doesn't mean them, it means us. Now, you see, the way it works is that progress and development is directly proportional to population density. So if we have progress, if we have technological development to sustain a population base of 7 billion people, and you can actually develop and build on this growth and technology, you can actually go to the next plateau, you know, 10 billion people, because we're going to have wealth, we're going to have, you know, bigger families, more mouths to feed. More mouths to feed means there's less food for them. And for the Rockefellers of this world to survive, most of us have to die. Which is why, if you kind of look around us, around the world, we're seeing things like, you know, terminologies: demand destruction, zero growth, deindustrialization, Club of Rome's, you know, famous limits to growth report back in 72 when they're talking about, you know, Malthusian population reduction schemes. And so the elite understand that if there's no technological advancement, we're going to go to hell. And this is exactly what they're doing. So on the one hand, they're reducing the world's population, not by killing us, you know, outright, you know, with bullets, but by reducing the, you know, the economic growth and development. They're reducing the population base, because we need technology in order to develop the necessary ways to have all these people survive. So on the one hand, as they're deindustrializing the world, sending us to hell in a handbasket, they're using, you know, the gazillions of dollars of their wealth to develop, you know, and discover these amazing technologies, absolutely mind-boggling technologies, everything from brain enhancements, you know, to neuroscience, to nanotechnology, you know, synthetic biology, and so, you know, space exploration. So they understand, so that this gap between us and them is getting greater and greater, because there was a point about 20 years ago as a result of information revolution, computer technology, where, anybody, be it you, me, somebody sitting, in Japan, or an Aborigine sitting in the middle of, an outback in Australia, or a Koya Indian sitting on a tree in a, Bolivian Amazon rainforest. If you have a computer, if you have internet connection, and you have Google, you have as much knowledge as any of these secret societies throughout history. And so the elite understood that for them, again, to widen this gap, because they couldn't afford for the 99.9%, to reduce the gap in knowledge. So again, for them to widen this gap, they're destroying the world's economy on purpose, while on the other hand, they're using the technological advancements, to separate, to widen this gap between us and them. This is a very intricate point. So, to go back and to, answer concretely your question, they're not concerned about overpopulation because they know it's a hoax. They understand that the reason they need to reduce the world's population has nothing to do with the fact that there's too many of us. But the fact is that if you have 10, 20 billion people, it's very difficult to manage such an incredible load of humanity when there are so few of them. They don't need that many people. They need fewer people, just enough to do what needs to be done, and the rest out. But on the other hand, they also understand that our future as humanity, and we, the people, have to understand this, is not here on the planet Earth. It's our calling to discover, the universal principles of nature and to conquer the galaxies. It's out there to be conquered, whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God. The idea of immortality has nothing to do with how many times you cross yourself per day. It has to do with assuring the survival of the human species. And for us to survive 1,000,000 years from now, we must conquer every nook and corner of the galaxy without even mentioning the fact, and I finish, that, in space, in the solar system, Moon, Mars, etc., you have all the natural resources you would need to continue growing technologically on the planet Earth and begin the space exploration age and begin the colonizing of the Moon, of Mars, and so on, so that the future generations, by about the year 2050, as this report, Strategic Trends Report 2007-2036 predicts, by 2050, we'll be going in large numbers to Mars. It's like taking a subway, except we'll be going to Mars.
Oh, I look forward to that. Hopefully I'm still alive then. Maybe some of the other aspects not look forward, but I want to get to the idea of how human evolution's going to change. And I'm wondering, am I too far off in saying that if we look at technology the way it's going now, that within a couple of generations, it will be seen as akin to not sending your kid to school to not go in and have the DNA screened and therefore produce the best designer child you can possibly design. I mean, you got geneticists such as Gregory Stock that predict that in the future this will be very common, that we will that people will be designing the genetics of their kids.
It's one of the things about this book, and again, there's a lot of stuff out there in the market about technology, but there's no book out there that actually puts all of these elements together, with futurism, technology, geopolitics, understanding the world, the way the world works from the point of view of secret society. And, you have to remember, Michael, that, I am the author of the true story of the Bilderberg Group that, that brought out into this open all of this stuff, which a lot of people suspected, but nobody really knew. And now, 10 years after my book was published, Bilderberg is, as a term, has become, part of our lore. We talk about Bilderberg when we refer to anything secret or private. So the fact is that there's, people talk about future technology, but they miss other elements, which are very important. Economy, science, geostrategy, how media is controlled, and so on and so forth. As far as the technology itself, it's absolutely inevitable that, cybernetic enhancement, technological enhancement of human performance is going to take place over the next few years. It's unfathomable to think that, people are going to continue being people. Augmentation is going to be, some wet dream of of, nutcases. It's not like that at all. Man-machine fusion is just a matter of time. It's literally around the corner. What you're referring to is something else. One of the biggest breakthroughs in recent history, scientists have created a synthetic genome that can self-replicate. And what they've done is they've taken a cell and modified the genes of a cell by inserting DNA from another organism, and the bacteria replicated itself, thus creating a second generation of the synthetic DNA. And the organism will do exactly what the scientists intended it to do. A living thing, but under the control of man. So you see, if the 19th century was all about the revolution of harnessing energy from fossil fuels, which means oil, and the 20th century is about exploiting the power of data, which is computers, this century is about controlling biology. And what is amazing about this is that the cell was assembled and sparked into life in a laboratory. And this technology has literally taken us across a threshold. It's a turning point that marked the coming age of this new science called synthetic biology, found an ambition that one day, very, very soon, Michael, over the next couple of years max, we will, without any doubt whatsoever, will be able to design and manufacture a human being in a laboratory the same way, you can manufacture, a cake, for example. In other words, you can get a DNA of anything here on Earth, and you can create an organism that never before existed entirely from non-living materials. This is mind-boggling. And what the scientists are doing, they're creating new life at the same time, as we're creating life forms that the human immune system and the world has never thus far experienced. And as such, it will revitalize perennial questions about the significance of life, what it is, why it is important, and what role humans should have in its future. And you mentioned a very interesting idea, the idea of, putting together a human being. Well, that's exactly what it's going to be done. I don't know if you saw a film a few years back with Jude Law called Gattaca.
Oh, we have that technology.
We have that technology, exactly. Absolutely right.
I read that the Chinese are actually trying to determine, looking at the genetic structures and genomes of people that are high achievers. And then their idea would be that you'd give a woman a fertility drug, she'd produce 20 eggs, you'd fertilize them, and then see which one would be the smartest, healthiest kid, and then implant that one.
But not only that, they've already gone beyond that. Now they're using, DNAs of third individuals to mix in other words, they're mixing in other people's DNA in with the couples to literally produce a new breed of humans. So it's not a question of a man and a woman, mating, you have a child. No, you have men and a woman and then somebody else's genes, DNA. So you can actually literally build the human being block by building block as if it was Lego. But there's a darker side to all of this. Consider, for example, people like me, or criminals, or dissidents, or people who think differently from the official party line of one world state. Well, we could have our children's DNA altered during pregnancy as punishment for our non-obedience. And what's more, by altering the DNA, the private corporations and governments, who will obviously work hand in glove, they can create a society without memory. In other words, people whose life experiences are stored on a memory drive running on a 1-week cycle through modified DNA over and over and over and over again. So you won't need a history, you won't need geography, you won't need photographs, you won't need anything at all, because after 1 week, everything will be canceled and you start again. And this is very, very, very much possible. And this isn't, again, some, crazy scientific dream come true. No, this is Huxley's 21st century scientific dictatorship without tears. This is exactly how they understand transhumanism.
It sounds weird, but it might be that I know that Bertrand Russell talked about having certain traits within the elite, and then the other trait, the masses would have those traits spread out. And I'm just thinking, if you look at things like, something weird like psychopathy, I mean, for someone in a leadership position, they might want their children to have a lack of empathy, to take, to be their rulers. but you might want to breed that out in the lower classes because that could lead to rebellion. I mean, most people think, well, that's, there's other things too, like ADHD, things like that are usually associated with corporate leaders. I mean, and then in America, you drug all these boys that have like these symptoms they call ADHD, but if you screen at the beginning, you could get rid of all these people you don't want.
Exactly. Technology will increasingly dominate the world. There's no doubt about it. As population, resource exploitation, and potential social conflict grows. Therefore, the success of this convergent technologies priority area is essential to the future of humanity. You see, the very idea of transhumanism, it fills people's hopes and minds with dreams of becoming superhuman. Being able to upload your mind, download information on the computer, through microchips. But the fact of the matter is that the true goal is the removal of that pesky human free will itself. So post-humanity will be a new human, which has been genetically engineered and brain chipped for total control, part man and part machine. This new man of the near future will no longer have a need of the sexual reproductive function. And if the elite's plan is to reduce the world's population, I can't think of a better way to do that.
Well, you're talking about a beehive thing. That goes back to the idea like in ancient Mesopotamia and back to Noah's time, the idea that the beehive is the ideal society, the workers, and then you have a very small, like, queen class and so forth. The definition of human being, do you think we'll get to a point where a woman could go in, she could have an egg cell extracted, and she could purchase a synthetic sperm cell and fuse the two together? And if so, what would you call the child? Would it be human?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, you were very close to achieving that. Very close, from point of view of synthetic biology. As I said to you earlier, Michael, I don't know. It would be a post-human, a transhuman, man-machine, cyborg, a thing that's not totally human. I don't know what we're going to call it. We're going to have to come up with a new definition. There's right now 3 sexes, right? There's men, there's women, and there's, the transsexuals. That's a sex in Germany on the passport. Okay, you have this new area where they call it transsexuals. Okay, it's a sex now. Now, in the very near future, we're going to have a fourth definition, which is transhuman, the fusion of man-machine. You mentioned, beehive. Well, the transhumanists have a popular term called hive mind, which refers to the giant collective intelligence that might be created when people all over the world link their brains together with technology. And now people say, well, no, it's not going to happen. It doesn't exist. Some crazy, nonsense. Well, we already have hive mind. Except that today it's called cloud. And now you upload your files onto this, invisible effervescent cloud. In the near future, you'll be able to upload your mind and live forever in cyberspace, because that's how the elite understand immortality. So, in other words, through this hive mind, we're creating a whole new intelligence through symbiotic existence. It is this human beehive which has been the ideal society in the eyes of the elite for a very long time. It is the template for the post-humanity, the ultimate slave race, scientifically designed to never rebel, and the wholesale disappearance of the human being with our divine spark of reason at the expense of group speak, group think, and also group actions.
Okay, wow. That goes beyond any dystopian program I've ever seen. Now, you mentioned, I gotta ask this, because I think it's possible. Nanotechnology, most people never even heard of it, or if they have, it's been in some, it's not even mentioned much in sci-fi. But you mentioned the thing about transsexuals. Well, isn't it true that with nanotechnology, that at least in theory, that at least at the beginning of this, people will be able to redesign their bodies, since these can work on the cellular level? I mean, this could offer people, you'd have all kinds of variations that people might go for. I think you're right. I think most people don't know what nanotechnology is. I'm sure they've heard the term, but, nano is
is something very, very small. It's a space between one atom and about 400 atoms. And just to give you an idea, in terms of space, and length, if you think of an Earth of a new scale, let's say a billionth of a meter. So, for example, the distance between the moon and the Earth is about 1 billion meters. That's a day's travel. The difference between a meter and a nanometer, okay, which is a billionth of a meter, is literally takes about a few seconds of travel time. And a nanoscale is about 100,000 times smaller than your strand of hair. Now what happens, and the reason this technology is so incredible, and it is so new, it's just been, discovered about 20 years ago. And the reason this, the technology is so amazing is that at a nanometer scale, at this tiny, tiny, tiny little scale, everyday materials, they start to act in unimaginable ways. So for example, we know that if you take, a piece of steel, a large chunk of steel, it acts a certain way. There's certain characteristics that it has. Okay? Stainless steel doesn't corrode, etc., etc. But when you take it and you reduce it to a tiniest, area, which is a nano area, then the material, the steel, begins to act and begins to take on properties which, up until very recently we didn't even know existed. So the behavior of these nanomaterials, they change as the size becomes so small as compared to a large amount of the same material. It is a space in which quantum behavior begins to replace the Newtonian physics. You see, Michael, in any direction you go, if you go up or down, there comes a point where you hit limits set by physical law. It's called Moore's law. Quantum mechanics, speed of light, gravitational forces. But what happens is, the advent of this new science and technology related to the genetic revolution, because again, nano and genetic revolution, they're very much interconnected. We can literally rewrite our genetic construct. So in a span of a generation, check it out. We've gone from genetically modified plants to genetically modified animals. You remember the doll,
Mm-hmm.
Sheep dolly. Well, the next step, obviously, is going to be what? Genetically modified humans. And when you start, mixing genetically modified humans and human beings, and you start fusing them together, who knows what's going to come out? But what is absolutely certain is that nanotechnology is going to play a very, very important role, in this generational change that we as people are about to embark on.
Yeah, because the idea is, I guess, in theory, you could program these things to then program your DNA, and therefore you could make yourself into something different. That's really bizarre.
There's something else about nanotechnology. Nano robots, or nanobots as they're called, okay, they're amazing. Again, as I said earlier, technology is an amazing thing. We need it. All these people think that, if we don't have the technology, we can, have a better planet and live longer, or, have cleaner air. It's all nonsense. It's nonsense to the point it only goes to show you how illiterate people are as far as technology is concerned. We need nanotechnology, for example, to cure cancer, because you can, program nanobots to discover cancerous cells and kill them before they become fully blown cancerous cells. You can send nanobots, and if we have some kind of a brain seizure or possible brain seizure, they can fix it before it becomes reality. And so the nanobots were created to be like life itself, to be able to reproduce and to serve our needs. And the intelligence of a nanotech is not going to be in one nanobot. It will be in the collective intelligence of trillions and quadrillions of nanobots working together and pooling their thinking resources. You can program these things specifically, for example, so they attack only people with certain characteristics. This would be like Hitler's, wet dream come true. So anything when we talk about technology, it's always a double-edged sword. On the one hand, we need the technology, and especially if it's used wisely for the betterment of humanity, we're all going to be the better for it. But if the elite, knowing what they've done to humanity in the past, and if we extrapolate what we know about their actions into the future, we have very little reason to believe that they're going to be using these gazillions of dollars of discoveries to help humanity. Now, but the danger of the nanotechnology is nano weapons, which is weapons made of, nanotech. They attack a target, for example, at a molecular level, then use the molecules of the target as raw materials to replicate more copies of themselves because they're living organisms. So in this way, small amounts of these replicators could have the capacity to destroy anything on Earth. They would, start by devouring plants, animals, and ultimately people. And this is how wars of the future will be fought. And I can tell you categorically, because I've given several conferences, I'm not going to say where, but to Joint Chiefs of Staff of certain nations in South America, where they're already looking at the very near scenario on the battlefields. They're not talking about, guerrillas or terrorists against, regular army. They're talking about men-machines supported by nanotechnology against cyborgs supported by men-machines. This is the wars of the very near future. And as I said again, this isn't some, crazy outfit in the middle of the jungle. These are the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the top 3- and 4-star generals of armed forces of some of the most important nations in South America already working on the scenarios of the near future war scenarios, forgive the repetition, on the battlefield.
And if they're working on it, I'm sure the Chinese, Russians, and the United States, amongst others, are also working on it.
Exactly. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but there's Hollywood is a great gauger of technological advancements. I'm not talking about Hollywood as in, Driving Miss Daisy, these kinds of films. I'm talking about high-tech films. We've seen Terminator. Well, the, augmented reality, that's already a reality. Blade Runner, that's the world that these people think we're going to be living in. RoboCop, okay? Then you have G.I. Joe 2, which is all based on nanotech, which is how Joes get killed in the beginning. Transcendence with Johnny Depp, that's coming up in the next few weeks, where Johnny Depp plays the role of, world's famous transhumanist engineer who gets killed by, this terrorist anti-tech group. And as he's dying, they upload his mind onto the computer, and his mind tries to take over the world. Well, this is their, wet dream come true. Gattaca, Public Enemy with Will Smith. Hey, there you have your NSA technology. I Am Legend, also with Will Smith. Remember that one about, the deadly virus?
Yeah. I can't remember the one that had Keanu Reeves, where it was the remake of when the.
Well, yeah, Matrix, and you also had Minority Report.
Yeah, but there was one where these robots, like you described, like nanobots, go out to kill humanity to save the planet.
Humanity to save the planet? I don't know. That's not Minority Report. It's not Philip K. Dick.
No, I think it was the remake of When the Earth Stood Still.
I don't know. I didn't see that film. But, you look at all these films, Moon, Minority Report, Avatar, video games like Deus Ex, Elysium that you mentioned earlier. This is what, these people, how they understand the world. Men in Black. Everybody's seen Men in Black. Remember that, the technology for amnesia beam? When Will Smith put his glasses on, said you didn't see anything, click, and people didn't even know what hit them. Well, this technology exists. It's called Active Denial System, ADS. It's a byproduct of larger ongoing research looking for technology that could delete and then replace your memory. And this is already very much reality. And there's a new series on TV, which I very strongly advise people watch. It's called Almost Human on Fox. And it's an amazing series. And I'm not promoting transhumanism. I'm just saying as a series itself, which gives us a look in, a peek into technological future. It's very, very much real. Allegedly, the series takes place in 2048. Well, one of the characters is a cyborg cop. But the technology is so advanced right now that we can kind of have this over the next 3 years or so. And this series deals specifically with neuroscience, which is a study of the nervous system. And Michael, today with advances in chemistry, computer science, engineering, medicine, and so many other disciplines, neuroscience now also includes the study of the molecular, cellular, developmental, structural, functional, evolutionary, computational, and medical aspects of the nervous system. So this technology is real. It has become very much part of our daily lives. And if you extrapolate it into the near future, needless to say, the first people who are going to be, using this technology is obviously going to be on the battlefield through the development of sophisticated neuro weapons, which will create a perpetual state of uncertainty with the promise and also peril of the development of neuro warfare and its effects. And this is what the future looks like.
Yeah, I mean, even in my limited research, stuff I've come across reading this stuff, you're spot on when it comes to the research that's being done, and there's way more. In fact, I would really, really, really encourage people to get their hands on your book. It's Trans Evolution, The Coming Age of Human Deconstruction.
That's right. People can get it. I think it's available all over America, but easiest thing to do is probably get it through Amazon. I'll call my publisher, TrineDay.com, Chris Milligan. But I have to tell you that we've done about 200 interviews in the past 2.5, 3 weeks, and I hope I have enough voice left for the rest of the week because it's a Monday. But the point is that it's a shocking look. I don't mean to scare people because it's not the point of the book at all, but it certainly helps you understand how technology, synthetic biology, space exploration. There's a chapter that deals explaining to people how, conquer the conquest of space and asteroids and all these private companies who are launching on this race against the clock to conquer the moon, get to Mars, conquer the asteroids around the planet Earth in order to build them for the natural resources there, how all of these elements play out and form part of this one continuum which is controlled from behind the scenes by the shadow masters.
Wow. Okay, well, I'm just going to leave it at asking people to find your book and look up some of the other articles that you've had something to do with putting out there. You've done excellent work there, Daniel, and really thank you very much for sharing this with our audience. Really, really, really enjoyed Daniel Estulin's interview. He gave a lot of information. You could just tell that there was so much more that he wanted to share. I haven't read his book. I've seen sections, and it looks like it's really well researched. The book, Trans Evolution, The Coming Age of Human Deconstruction. But, this issue, I'm just going to give some commentary here for the next 16 minutes. But I want to just have people understand this. This particular issue is the issue, as I stated at the beginning of the interview. This is an issue that's going to affect everyone's life, directly or indirectly, and it will certainly affect your grandchildren, maybe even your children. It's hard to say how fast this technology will get out there. It's hard to know how much has already been done. I mean, I've read the articles about research done where you do human chimeras. If you know what a chimera is, it's a human-animal hybrid. Think back to some of those pictures from ancient Egypt and ancient Samaria. And you thought, well, that's someone's fanciful, their fanciful, fantasy, imagination. But once we have computers that can, accurately, pinpoint what genes are going to do what things within a sequence, then when you mix human and animal DNA, you will be able to create actual, at least in theory, actual functional creatures. I mean, if you just mix human and animal DNA now, I think probably what you would get is some sort of monstrosity that would look like from that one Aliens episode where was it Rigby or whatever her name was, Ridley? She comes in, and when she's kind of made the discovery that she's a hybrid, and then she sees all of these mistakes in the lab, all of these half human, half alien horrible mistakes. The thing is that once though you could actually map out the chromosomes and know what everything will do in a right sequence, and who knows, we may already have that kind of computer technology, then you could mix 10, 15, 20, 50% animal DNA into a human DNA, and then see what you would get from that. I mean, you want a centaur? do you want something that looks like Pan from the ancient Greeks? Who knows what they had back in Noah's day? I personally think that Noah's day was not something that was just a simple agrarian society, and it wasn't something that looked like some sort of maybe a little tiny bit of industrialization or so forth. I think what you had was something far more advanced than we have today. And the whole idea of Atlantis ties in very well with Noah's flood. That there was probably stories that got passed down through the ages, or text that got passed through the ages, that described this wonderful paradise of a society. And, you know, what destroyed it? Well, I would encourage people maybe look into some of the ancient writings like the Book of Enoch and so forth. I mean, come on. You know, I was asked by a young woman today, why haven't they really made a good sci-fi presentation of Atlantis? I mean, there was a few kind of goofy Atlantis style movies from the 50s and so forth. But it was like some Greeks who had an island and, ancient civilization type things. I would prefer to have something where you had something that looked like it was from the movie Blade Runner, and or some of these Japanimation movie series, these dystopian movies, because I think that's what Noah grew up in. I think that's what Noah was used to, and that's why the world had to be sent through a cataclysm. I mean, otherwise, why, if it's just an agrarian society with some brick buildings that look like from ancient Babylon, then just send a disease down to Earth and give Noah and his immediate family immunity to the disease. That's all you needed to do. Why wipe out the whole world? It seems like a needless destruction. But anyway, the thing is that I was watching a documentary the other day. There's a documentary on Discovery, I believe. It's hosted by James Woods, the actor, and it was featuring Mikio Kaku. His last name's spelled, if you don't know this, K-A-K-U. You type that into Google and then just put down transhumanism or predictions for the future. He has a really good video about his predictions for 2030. And there's some awesome stuff in there, but what Mr. Estulin was talking about with the hive mentality, you know what that sounds like? It sounds like ants or bees, where you've got a very small number who have the potential of being the queen. Anything happens to the queen, they're capable genetically of reproducing. Otherwise, they're not able to. And you've got the millions upon millions of workers that just do their thing. And they can rub their antennas together. No one really knows how they communicate in that sense. I mean, there's pheromones, obviously, but the antenna seem to send some sort of messages. And, you know, the idea that they were presenting in this documentary was that in the not too distant future, we will not only be able to read each other's minds, but we will be able to upload into something similar to the cloud. And then you'll be able to interact, but also be interacted upon. Now, to me, that sounds like some sort of, you've turned humans into a giant neurological organism. And I do say organism in the singular sense. I mean, that's the idea I would get. If you think people are fixated on things now with their iPhones, think about what it would be like if you could merge with the rest of humanity. Will that then lead to this? Well, I've never heard of this speculation that Mr. Estulin pointed out, the idea that we could redesign people to where they would only be programmed for specific task, and therefore they would then be given information and memory and so forth that would be necessary for them to perform the tasks set forth, and then they would just, get erased and then start over again. And to me, that sounds that would be like the ultimate dystopian scenario. I mean, that goes well beyond anything in 1984. That goes well beyond anything that you see in Blade Runner and so forth. At least in Blade Runner, you still had individual thought. In fact, the whole premise of the movie seemed to be what is individual thought, in the sense that the synthetic humans were starting to develop an idea of their own self, and they didn't want to be terminated. They wanted to continue and to survive and to think and to create and so forth. The thing is, with this, it sounds like something like the closest thing I can think of in sci-fi would be the Borg on Star Trek. The idea that people would just live these, lives of just, nothing really that would be theirs. They would just do whatever was necessary, directed by who knows who or who knows what. Maybe a supercomputer would direct them, and reproduction would be done in labs. And then, similar to, again, the Matrix, that scene where the embryos were all harvested, millions upon millions of them, before they were inserted into the gel, the machine gel thing. Now, the thing is, I don't want to present the future as it's going to be this really horrible, horrible thing. I think we're going to see changes. I think we're going to see a greater division in human society. I think the people that have intelligence and ingenuity at this time will have the ability to be able to be more individuals in the future. Now, of course, they will probably, they will adapt. They will probably start using a lot of these implants. And to be honest, I've asked people this question for years now. How many people would get some of this transhumanist stuff done on them? A few years ago, 1 or 2 out of a group of 30. Now you get about a third that would do it. I even ask questions of young people. I say, and I don't mean kids, I mean like 18, 19-year-olds. And I ask, would you replace your body? Just have your brain taken out and put into a synthetic body. And usually the first question they'll ask is, in fact, the first question they will actually ask is, will this last? Will this keep me young forever? Or if I was old, would I be young again? And they say, well, yeah. And then they're like, throw the body away. And this I think is something that we will see. We'll see it slightly when we have artificial limbs that will work 10, 20, 30 times better. Like, think about $6 Million Man back in the 70s. And people will voluntarily, I believe, remove functional arms, legs, maybe eventually whole bodies, and have synthetic bodies put on. Now, the population thing, I'm not sure. I think population's going to be in the decline. I think the population, as opposed to how many jobs there will be, we already see how that's working because we're getting more robotics and so forth. And when you even have China starting to invest in robotics to replace workers, you realize that we're getting into an increasingly technical age where people are going to need more intelligence. And at the same time, we are needing people with lesser intelligence even less. What place will they fulfill in this society? And I think the more intelligent people will be able to make use of genetic enhancements, of synthetic enhancements, and so forth. And you're going to see a shift in human, you can call it evolution, that is going to be phenomenal. Where you'll have, I don't know, the Star Trek-ish type people, and then people that look like they're going to one of the big box stores on a, costume day or something. The thing is that, yes, we are going to see this. But I think population-wise, I think there really is a strategy right now in place designed to decrease human population. And if you look around you, look at young people today. How many people do you know from the age of 20 to 30 who are married and have a family at this time? Think about that. And then you probably you may have some people in that situation, but then think of how many who don't fit into that situation. And if you figure we need at least a little over 2 kids per family just to replace ourselves, well, I can tell you right now, on my Facebook, I've got tons of people, hundreds and hundreds, who are ages mostly in 20-somethings and early 30-somethings. And of that group, I would say only a very small minority are married and starting families. A very small minority. And you might think, well, that's in the Western world. But you know what? That's going to extend. Once you computerize, they're already talking about putting all the world on the internet. Wi-Fi from satellite. Launching hundreds of drones that will fly over Africa and bring the internet to Africa. When you have internet and television in every home all over the world, whether it's in a remote area, Tibet, or the slums of Rio, that is when you're going to see population decline. That is when you'll be able to get the message out, and you're just going to see things collapse. And again, we're already seeing that in the developed world, just shrinking like crazy. Even in countries where they promote birth rates, like France, Russia, and so forth, still, it's not that, they're not really much. I mean, France is barely at replacement, and Russia's getting there, but they're still behind. I don't think you're going to see as much of the mega cities except in what we now have as the non-developed world. But I think that their populations will decline as well. So maybe that one scenario of billions of people out to get each other's wealth is maybe not correct. But nevertheless, I really encourage people, look up some of this stuff. Look up Echelon's work. Look up Kaku's work. Look up any number of people. Ray Kurzweil there's a documentary about Ray Kurzweil out there. Look it up. Watch it. See what's coming. Don't be blindsided. See what's coming in the future. And this stuff is not fanciful. It's grounded in actual technology we have today. Anyway, we'll have lots of shows on this in the future. This is Michael Cross signing off from Unlock the Door Radio, and I encourage you to be here next week for another exciting episode.